Welcome back to another episode of the Mysterious Huntsman Podcast. Tonight I got a very special guest on from my old stomping grounds in South Alabama. From Evergreen, Alabama, we're going to have reporter and investigative journalist Lee Peacock from the Evergreen Current. And Lee is going to come on tonight and tell us some of the strange happenings that's going on down there that has kind of put Evergreen on the map as far as being either the Southeast or the Alabama's Bigfoot capital. So let's jump into it tonight and welcome Lee to the Mysterious Huntsman Podcast. Hey Lee, this is Paul with the Mysterious Huntsman Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Paul. I really thank you for having me on. I've looked forward to this and I appreciate it.
Man, me too, because I know you and I grew up kind of in the surrounding areas within each other, and there's a lot going on down there, and you seem to be kind of in the center of things, and kind of everything that is going on. That's why I reached out to you. And, you've got a Facebook page dedicated to some of the things, and you're a journalist and a reporter down there for the Evergreen Current. Is that correct?
That's correct. I've worked for the newspaper in Evergreen for about 12 years. And prior to that, I worked at the newspaper in Monroeville, which is just a short distance away, but it's in the same general area. I worked there for about 6 years.
Oh, cool, man. And you were telling me the other day that, speaking of Monroeville, you kind of got your inspiration, from someone down there that was like a journalist way back when and had kind of some stories, and it's just kind of got you interested and intrigued in the whole line.
Yes, you are 100% correct. I would say as a young child and as a teenager and as a high school student, there were two main things that had a huge impact on me. Like a lot of kids that grew up in Alabama, our library at school had the 13 Alabama Ghost books by Catherine Tucker Wyndham.
Oh yeah.
That had a huge. I can vividly recall just reading that book over and over again. It was just full of really neat ghost stories. But I would say the person that had the biggest impact on me and my interest in the unusual, the ghost stories and folk tales, there was a gentleman. His name was George Buster Singleton. Now, Singleton was a Korean War veteran, and he worked full-time as the gentleman who was the administrator of the local National Guard unit there in Monroeville. Well, he did that job until he retired, but it's kind of a thing on the side. He wrote a weekly newspaper column for the newspaper there in Monroeville, and he started this column in the early 70s, before I was even born, and he continued writing this column on up into the 2000s. He passed away in 2007. But a large number, I would say the majority of his columns were, he had a knack for gaining the trust of people who had unusual tales about ghosts and old folk stories, and he would relay those stories in the newspaper. And he was really good at it, and I'm in my early 40s, so I grew up in the days in the Stone Age before there was the internet and email, and I always looked forward to reading those columns in the paper, and we really devoured them. And as a kid, I can remember talking about those newspaper columns at school with my friends who had similar interests. And that really, those two things, Catherine Tucker Wyndham and George Singleton, really had a huge impact on me as a young person.
Yeah, and I'm kind of the same area. I actually read the same book, and I remember sitting in the Georgiana High School library, like day after day after day, and I'd check out that book, and that would lead me to another one, and it was incredible stories. And, to someone who also grew up back during the day when we didn't have the internet or video games or anything, it was, it would make my imagination run wild, yours as well, and everyone else down there. But it really fueled a passion for me to get out there and just kind of see what's going on.
Well, it's interesting. You kind of hit on that. Like whenever the neat thing about Singleton's writings was he wrote about places where once we got old enough to old enough to drive as older teenagers, my friends and I, we could actually visit some of the locations that he talked about, whether it be an old cemetery or maybe a particular spot in the road. There were a lot of different locations he mentioned, and then once I got into working in newspapers, through that job, I was able to gain access to maybe haunted houses and places that were kind of on private property. And, working at the newspaper kind of allowed me access to even more places that he talked about, which was really, really cool.
Well, yeah, you had a very good reason to be there, and no one would question that, and that's pretty cool. So how did you, if you don't mind me asking, how did you get into journalism in the newspaper?
That's a good question, because growing up, I never working as a journalist wasn't my goal. Whenever I went to college, I was actually I went to law school for a year, and I got my bachelor's degree at Alabama, and then I went on to law school. And when I was in law school, I got a part-time job working at a newspaper. And I'm a lifelong reader and writer. Have always enjoyed that type of stuff. But whenever I got this part-time job at the newspaper, I fell in love with it. Like it was like a duck to water. I really enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed getting out, and I'm a people person. I like talking with people because every person really has a story, and I always enjoyed just kind of interacting with people and going places, whether it be to maybe a crime scene, or on the other side of the coin, maybe a ball game. It was just a wide spectrum of places that job would take you, and you get to be really involved in the community. And long story short, I chose a full-time career in journalism, and just kind of let the law career go to the side.
Yeah, that's amazing, because with your career choice, and you run the kind of full gamut of everything. Like you said, you do the sports, you do the day-to-day local news, but people trust you, and they will talk to you probably a little more so than anybody else that just comes around and starts to ask questions about strange occurrences or whatever, because they don't trust everybody. So, and I know it helps with you being local.
That's right. I think that's the key. My family is from this area, and people kind of remember me. They see me as a local guy, and they see me as one of them. And I try to never burn somebody. You know what I'm saying? Like if somebody comes to me with an unusual story about a cryptid or a UFO or a ghost, I take what they're telling me, to be the truth. And I kind of see my role as the person that is to document what's happened to this person, to get this, to hammer down the specifics about, who was involved, what happened, when it occurred, the location, because I want somebody 100 years from now that may be researching this type of stuff to be able to look back at my stories and take as much information away as possible. That's kind of the role I see. I see myself as the person that documents what's happened.
Right, and if you do burn someone, or if you lose their confidence, your credibility is out the window, and then
that's right.
Then everything you've done in the past and even the present, is just kind of null and void, basically. I mean, so you have to stay. You have to be true to people. You have to give them their confidentiality, and you just have to just give everyone the facts. That as far as what I've found, I don't really know where I stand on a lot of these issues. I just know I have a passion to find out what's going on. So, I think you just have to lay out the facts as they are, and let the reader or the listener make up their own mind.
Yeah, and I know it's somewhat controversial about how, like, I'm willing to take a report anonymously. Like if somebody walks into my office and says, "Hey, this has happened to me, but I don't want my name in the paper." I know there are some reporters that wouldn't print the story because the person doesn't want to go on the record and use their name. But my policy has typically been, to tell their story any way and as long as I know where the story's coming from, you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, for sure. And then I know that, you know, I do have a career, or not a career, but a past in law enforcement, and every piece of the puzzle makes it counts. You know, if you decided not to take that story or print that story, then later down the road, if you're trying to build a case upon something, you could have used something. You know, you could reach back in your file and grab this, and it would make sense. Yeah, do you know what I mean?
I certainly do, and you kind of reminded me of something too that I think is important. I'll give you an example. With I've done a lot of Bigfoot stories, and through my job at the newspaper, the newspaper has kind of become a clearinghouse for the local Bigfoot reports, and it allows me to see the big picture, like by recording the times and the locations and the specifics of these individual reports. I can kind of I get a real good look at the big picture of what's going on, and that's been kind of an interesting aspect of all this too.
Yeah, you know, I've got a lot of family back down in that area, and I try to keep in touch. I try to get down there and visit as much as possible, but your stories and the story overall of Bigfoot or any kind of cryptid in the area, it seems to be well received. And I mean, you know, the town's kind of taken it and embraced it, and I think that's really neat.
Yeah, and the media has played a big part in that. You know, I had never written a Bigfoot story, I would guess, until maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, and then all of a sudden, I just really I could have written a Bigfoot story a week from the Conecuh, Monroe County area. It's been really interesting, and I've received reports from people from all walks of life, people that are very open about what they've seen, people that you know would rather just talk about it anonymously because they're afraid they'll be ridiculed. You know, a lot of those type of people are professionals, like people that work out in the woods, like foresters that don't want to go on the record because, you know, they just catch a lot of grief about it. But it's been kind of a wild ride in Evergreen. You know, Evergreen is the official Alabama Bigfoot. It's the Bigfoot capital of Alabama. It was the state legislature actually named it that.
Oh,
so
cool.
That's kind of a unusual distinction. And there have been towns in other states, like as far away as Texas and places like that have followed suit with Evergreen and have adopted that name for themselves in their respective states. That's been kind of a neat little thing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you had a hand in that, and you know, the old hometown, you know, is really representing. You know, it's pretty neat.
Yeah,
but I mean,
it's
no, I was going to say that. I mean, Alabama has a really long history of these reports, and I mean, as does a lot of the Southeast. But it seems like Alabama has, at least from the Florida line, I know Bruton area, a lot of the state line between Florida and Alabama and some of the swampy areas through there. There's a lot of reports through there, and I can't, you know, being former law enforcement, I you know, whether I have trace evidence or blurry pictures or whatever, I mean, I can never discount witness testimony. And I mean, you know, cases are won or lost based on witness testimony, you know, or you know, your jurors coming up with a verdict or whatever. But I mean, just think about the thousands of reports through the hundreds of years of this creature, this bipedal creature that has kind of made a big mark on everyone. Think about thousands of reports all across the country, even the world. If just one of those reports has some validity, then that makes it well worth it.
Yeah, you're 100% correct, and that's kind of my view too. You know, if you take into account all the reports that come in, sure, some of them are probably black bears, some of them are you know, the witness is seeing something, you know, they're thinking Bigfoot, but it's something else. But like you say, if just one of those reports is the real deal, then what does that say? You know, so you know, I consider myself to be an open-minded skeptic. I'm the type of person, I really have to see something to believe it. But again, I'm open-minded enough to know that, hey, I don't know everything, and what these people are telling me may be the absolute truth. So, I just kind of go with it. I kind of take that approach when I'm doing these stories.
No, and that's perfect. I mean, I think as a researcher or investigator, journalist, police officer, private investigator, anything, I mean, if you have a closed mind going in and your opinion is skewed right from the start, you're going to miss out on so much. And it just irritates me to talk to someone who just is matter of fact, no, this cannot be happening. This didn't happen. There's no such thing. And I just kind of turn them off at that point. I don't even try to get into a debate because I really can't prove anything either way. But I'm like you. I'm open-minded, and I want to hear the story. I want to hear this person out because a lot of these people I've spoken with, and I know you have too, they are seeing something that they can't explain. And you're talking about people that grew up in the woods, grew up hunting, fishing. I mean, it's the South, it's what we do. But when, they know everything that moves and everything that makes a noise, they know exactly what's out there. And when there's something comes along that's totally different, they know it, and they'll tell you that.
Well, I forget where I heard this or read this, but this is something else that I kind of believe in regard to the paranormal and ghosts and UFOs. I think about the caveman. If you can kind of picture a caveman that's in his little cave in prehistoric times, and he's looking out over the treetops at the end of the day, and he sees lightning flash in a distance. Now in his caveman mind, he can't explain what that lightning is. He doesn't have the scientific ability to get into the the explanation where it involves electricity and all this type of stuff. So he comes up with his own explanations. He says this is the gods or whatever,
Right.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, as far as we've come, as the human race has come, we know a lot. But I think also there's a lot about this world that we still don't understand, and we're sort of like that caveman. We see things and we come up with what we think are good explanations, but I think a lot of times we're still way off. So.
Oh yeah.
As time passes, things that are mysterious to us today will have a simple scientific explanation.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. And no matter how technologically advanced we get or how smart we think we get, we still just I think we're still missing the boat on a lot. And I read a lot of Carl Sagan, and I remember Carl Sagan wrote about the human brain. We know a lot about how to do surgery on the brain and how to identify certain illnesses with the brain. But the reality is, as smart as we are, the medical profession has a very loose grasp on how the brain actually functions and how it works. And I think that's a good example of kind of what we're talking about. As smart as we are, we still have a lot to learn. Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, let's switch gears just a little bit, okay. And because I just want to ask you, at what point did you start getting some of these Bigfoot reports in? And do you mind going into some of the cases that you've heard and some of the ones that you think are like pretty valid?
Sure. I would say it was probably, I'd have to go through my notes to be specific, but I would say it was probably about 2 years ago. I had these two brothers. Well, it was actually three brothers. They were the Ackerman brothers they lived in a little community called Pine Orchard, which is near the community of Burnt Corn that sits on the Conecuh-Monroe County line in southwest Alabama.
Okay.
And I knew one of these brothers because I worked in EMS for years, and he and I worked on the ambulance together. Well, he was telling me about, he basically told me, "Hey, look, my brothers and I, we've seen a Bigfoot." And I said, "Okay, well, kind of tell me about what happened." And he said, he proceeds to tell me the story about how he and his two brothers By the way, one of his brothers is a minister who I take to be very trustworthy, and they rented this house, and they started having unusual things happen, like they would hear unusual noises in the woods. They would have one of the brothers was a smoker, and he would go outside and he would have rocks thrown at him from unexplained sources like that. The rocks would just come flying at him out of the woods, little small stones and stuff. Well, over time, this activity began to increase. One of the brothers was outside at night and saw kind of an unexpected sudden movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned and looked and saw something large kind of just stand up and kind of run off. And then they saw a Bigfoot cross the road near their house. Like they saw it come out of the woods and cross the road. Now I'm standing here listening to this story, and I tell Virgil Ackerman was the gentleman that I dealt with first. I said, well, Virgil, can you kind of just can I meet you up there and you show me where this happened? Well, I had never met the brother Wesley, who was the minister. Well, I meet him up there, and I say, okay, I want you to take me to the spot where you saw this Bigfoot cross the road. And they walked straight to, like they both walked straight to this point, and they said, right here is where the Bigfoot crossed the road. And I was talking with the minister, Wesley, and he said, Mr. Peacock, and I never met this gentleman before. He's a really nice guy. He said, I would not, this place is probably a 20-mile drive from Evergreen. He tells me, he says, I would not drag you up here as part of a hoax or some kind of fraud or some kind of joke or some kind of lie. He said, this happened. This really happened. And that's probably been 2.5 years ago when I first interviewed those guys, and I've talked with them numerous times since then, and they've never once changed their story. They've never once added to it. They never, some people will kind of elaborate. They'll kind of juice the story up, but they've stuck to the same story the entire time. And once that story hit the newspaper, I really began to receive kind of a flood of reports from that same general area, from people that were from different walks of life and disconnected from each other. And one of these gentlemen was a fellow named Ashley McFall. Now, Ashley McFall is one of the most educated people I know. He's a nurse anesthetist at a local hospital. He's a former corpsman in the United States Navy. He's traveled throughout the world. He's a huge outdoorsman and a hunter. And a fine, upstanding, trustworthy person. Well, I did not know that he's also one of probably the preeminent Bigfoot enthusiast in our area. And whenever the Ackerman brothers story came out, I was totally unaware that Ashley McFall owned a hunting property nearby. He had also had a number of Bigfoot experiences basically right across the road from where the Ackerman brothers lived. Well, to me, this kind of added a lot of credibility to what the Ackerman brothers had told me, because you had this totally, these gentlemen didn't know each other, so you had this other fellow who was saying, yeah, I've had stuff happen on my property too. Well, compounding all this, there was another gentleman that lived a little further up the road over in Monroe County, and his name was Carl Pugh. Now, Carl Pugh, he reported that he came face to face with a Bigfoot type creature. And again, this gentleman was totally unconnected with these others. And as chance would have it, there's a TV show called Killing Bigfoot. And one of the gentlemen involved with that TV show is a man named Don McDonald. Well, after all this stuff came to light, those gentlemen came to that area and investigated some of these claims, and they went to Mr. Carl Pugh's property, and they found some pretty unusual stuff. Chiefly, there were some claw marks, Paul, that were way up on the trunk of a tree. I'm over 6 feet tall, and it was really hard for me to kind of reach up and touch where this claw mark was. I grew up in Southwest Alabama, hunting, fishing, doing all that, and never in my life have I seen claw marks like what I saw that day. Now, the Killing Bigfoot guys are from Mississippi and Oklahoma, and one of the gentlemen as we're standing there looking at these claw marks, I'll never forget it because it kind of gave me the chills because we're standing out in the woods. He says, fellas, he said, y'all got monsters in these woods. And, you know, and again, you know, some people look at those claw marks and they say, well, that was fake, or they say that was a bear. You know, people, you know, try to come up with different explanations, but me standing there on the ground looking at it, I don't see how it could have been faked because these were deep. It was a deep gouge. I can send you photos of it, but it was a deep gouge that just kind of ran across the trunk. And you would think if somebody was trying to fake it, like if they were standing like on a ladder or a chair or something like that and were reaching up with some kind of three-fingered scraper, you would see where they would have had to make multiple tries to kind of get the same effect.
Right.
This was like this. It looked like some type of really tall clawed creature because it was kind of an incline there. It was kind of like he was going down the hill, and maybe to slow himself, he reached up and kind of grabbed the tree to kind of slow himself down. But when I say it was bizarre, it was one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah,
and I've seen some weird stuff.
No, I saw the picture. I was following the page, the Facebook page about that area, and I saw the pictures, and it's like that's when I came on the scene. That's when I started trying to get in touch with you. I was like, I've got to know more about these claw marks and what's going on down there, and there was even a small video clip that came out of reported Bigfoot maybe strangling or drowning a deer. Is that correct? In a creek bed?
Yes.
Yeah, that was incredible.
Yes, that really was amazing. Now that's a good case of the gentleman that shot that video has asked to remain anonymous, but the video I'm sure the video is on YouTube, but that was shot in Claiborne, or near Claiborne, which is kind of an old ghost town over in Monroe County, and it's not far from the Alabama River. But yeah, that video, it's amazing. I mean, you can, whenever they cleaned it up, the video was shot on a phone,
right?
And I forget the name of the person that they sent it to, but it was kind of a person who was an expert on stabilizing videos and cleaning them up.
I think I know who it is. I think it was MK Davis.
That's it. That's who it was.
Who has worked on the Patty video? You know, the Patterson Gimlin Bigfoot video, the big famous one. But yeah, he worked on that, and it was pretty incredible.
And if you in a close viewing of that video, I think it actually shows two creatures. And one of the theories is that the cryptid or the Bigfoot or the Sasquatch that's drowning the deer is actually the smaller of the two. And one of the theories is that this is a younger Bigfoot being trained by an older adult on how to capture game for food. That's one of the popular theories about that video.
Right.
But hey, you know as well as I do how difficult it would be to, number one, catch a deer barehanded, and number two, drown one. I mean, it would be nearly impossible.
Yeah, and I even saw some, a lot of the skeptics or naysayers was like, well, why didn't you stand there and video or get better video, get close? I mean, I've been in some hairy situations, not with this kind of thing, but could you imagine actually being there and seeing something that is not supposed to exist, or seeing two things that aren't supposed to exist, first of all, and then you're also watching this take place, as savage drowning or killing of an animal. I mean, I'd have been long gone. I don't know if I'd have even thought to bring up a phone, but I mean, it's people say, well, why don't you get video? I don't think they really grasp what happens out there. If you're out there alone, if you're out there in the forest and you see something you're not used to seeing, I mean, a lot of people aren't really thinking about taking videos.
That's right. You're 100% correct. Yeah.
And why don't they shoot one? Well, people they see it through the scope, and then they're like, "What in the heck am I looking at?" And they don't want to pull the trigger. They don't, it's just. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But I'm just.
Well, that's okay. I've heard this is kind of a common thing. I've heard hunters that encounter these creatures, that may see them through a scope or may see them on the ground, you know, one common thing I hear is they come to realize that the firearm they have is going to do very little damage other than make this thing mad, and then who knows what's going to happen, you know.
Right. I've heard that, and I've heard others say that, well, there's something about it that, and I hate to say felt human, but it's like, I don't want to, what if I'm shooting something that's valuable? I don't know if that makes sense, but they see it and it's like, I don't want to shoot this person or this.
Yeah, it's almost like murder.
Yeah. I mean, I would have a hard time. I mean, I know killing Bigfoot's got its own deal, and I know listening to some other podcasts and other people, I mean, the only way you're really ever going to know is to have a body. But I think personally, I would have a hard time unless I was being threatened. You know, I would have a hard time just doing it just for the sake of proving. I mean, you know, that's just me, but I know everyone has a different opinion on that.
Yeah, the killing Bigfoot guys, I know what they do is controversial, but I've met 3 of those guys, and they're really nice. They're really nice gentlemen, and their whole thing is, I don't think that they really enjoy the idea of killing one. But I think the root of it is they know that the only way to prove that these things exist is to get a type specimen.
Sure.
And after they get one, I don't think they have any interest in killing anymore. But they're so bent on proving the existence of these things. They really see that as the only way to do it scientifically, you know. But you know, those guys would be great guests for your show.
Yeah, I mean, no, well, I don't know. I'm pretty small time. They're way bigger than me, but I would have them if they would come on. And
they're really down to earth guys. I think you get it. You find that you know, once you talk with them and get to know them, you probably have a lot in common with them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's others down there also in your area that, I mean, if you ever hear of anyone that would like to tell me their story, and it doesn't matter if it's a cryptid or Bigfoot story or a paranormal story, or even my personal favorite is the whole UFO phenomenon. And I don't really mind saying that anymore because of what, you know, the Pentagon and the Navy has been releasing lately, especially within the past day or two. And
yeah, it's pretty wild, isn't it?
It is. And, you know, it's like, you know, just let it sink in. Watch this video of these top fighter pilots in the world that, you know, they're filming this thing and they have zero clue. And the Navy says, well, here is something we can't explain. Yeah, this is they call them UAPs now, the unidentified aerial phenomena. But here's what we have. This is an unidentified aircraft that we can't keep up with. We can't tell you what it is, but this is real, and this is a real video. I mean, people need to let that sink in. I mean, and I think they'll be astonished. But that's off the subject, but...
Well, I think a lot of your pilots are kind of like your professional foresters. You know, they kind of kept their more unusual stories to themselves out of fear of it harming their careers or being ridiculed by their colleagues. But now that the Navy's kind of you know, gone on record that, you know, they don't know what some of this stuff is, maybe it'll kind of open up the gates for some of these guys to tell, you know, the full true stories about some of the stuff they've seen.
Yeah, I hope so. I have spoken with a couple of pilots, and they just wanted to talk to me. They didn't want to be on the podcast. They didn't really want to write their stories down, but they wanted to just tell someone that wouldn't really think they're crazy. And, you know, but to me, that speaks volumes. You know, I don't really care about this podcast. And I started this whole thing because I want to, the more information I can get into my brain, the better answers I can come up with, or maybe postulate or whatever. But I just want to hear the stories, and whether they come on or not, you know, I just enjoy hearing it. And I like the other night, I was fortunate enough to have the retired U.S. Air Force Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston with the Rendlesham Forest incident. He has a resume a mile long, and I was honored to have him on my little feeble podcast and tell me his story of an amazing account that he and other military personnel witnessed back in 1980 in Rendlesham Forest over in Britain. And it's one of the more documented military UFO accounts in history. You know, it's kind of been called the Britain's Roswell, but anyway, I'm really going way off, but I just, like I said, I just enjoy hearing these stories, and I wanted to create a platform where people could come on here and talk without fear of ridicule or judgment, because I think it helps people to talk about it, for one. And yeah, of course, we're going to get those who just want to make up stuff as they go. But I mean, you can kind of tell when it's going and when it's happening, and when they're kind of getting off the path a little bit, and they're kind of starting to fabricate some things, or I can, and I know you can. But there's a lot of stuff ramping up in this area, and I don't know where I'm going with any of that, but it's just I know you're hearing it and seeing it a lot in your field. I mean, we're getting reports across the country of everything from the cryptid sightings to the UFO sightings to the paranormal stuff. I mean, have you gotten any kind of reports down there other than the Bigfoot stuff?
Oh yeah. Over the years, I've done stories on a lot of different unusual topics. I've done a few UFO stories. There was a time, off the top of my head, I guess it was about 5 years ago. There was a round of UFO sightings in our area. I actually talked with Air Force people down in Eglin to kind of see, you know, if they had anything going on in this area. Oddly, they don't train in our area at night, so they had no good explanation for what people were seeing. Of course, it was kind of the standard unusual lights, lights that moved in zigzag patterns, stuff like that. But I've done lots of ghost investigation. You know, go to supposedly haunted locations. Spent the night in a lot of places like that. Had some unusual stuff happen, and I'll tell you one of the more odd series of stories that I've done over the years. In fact, again, off the top of my head, I guess it was probably about maybe 10 years ago. We had what people called the mystery booms. Are you familiar with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That became a huge thing in our area, and people. I heard one night, and I thought it was an electrical transformer had exploded. But, you know, got on Facebook, social media, and kind of was surprised to see that there were people as far as 30 miles away that heard this enormous boom in the middle of the night. And there was a series of those, and they kind of went unexplained. And I've come to learn that those happen kind of all over the world. It's kind of a known thing. Except that there's no good explanation for why these things happen. Most of them aren't explained away by being sonic booms. I learned that there's a geological phenomenon called I think it's called brontides. It's usually associated with earthquakes, but it has to do with loud booming noises that kind of precipitate seismic events.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people in our area thought that the noises kind of stemmed from maybe oil well drilling in our area, gas exploration. There was even tales of how some of these good old boys out in the woods had constructed enormous homemade cannons, and that was kind of the explanation. But never really got to the bottom of what all that was about. And every once in a while, somebody will send me a text or an email, say, "Hey, look, we had another boom last night at, you know, such and such time in the morning," and you know, and you'll come to find out that it was heard 50 miles away. You know, think about how loud something has to be heard 50 miles away.
Yeah, and what's weird about that, if it's heard 50 miles away, there has to be an epicenter, or there has to be like a ground zero, or but it's not. I mean, it's like if an explosion happened here, the closer you are to it, it to be heard 50 miles away, it would have leveled or shattered windows or something. But you really don't ever have that.
Well, and I think you kind of hit on this earlier. We kind of joked about growing up in the days before the internet and email and social media, but I think you and I kind of come from a generation now that are part of the next generation of investigators who look into this type of stuff. And the advantage we have now is the internet and social media, because I'm using the mystery booms phenomenon for an example. It allows you to kind of see a bigger picture, because if you get on Facebook and say, hey, I just heard a loud noise, and then you have people from a wide area kind of respond to that post on Facebook, well, that's a tool that an investigator like George Singleton would not have had in the early 1970s. He's not able to see that big picture like we can.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I tell you, something else good about our generation is we will be more apt to go put boots on the ground rather than be like a armchair, researcher, sit here and read about it and not really experience it. I mean, you can sit here and read and watch videos and YouTube, and you can critique and you can be a skeptic all day long, but until you go sit in that, old mental hospital all night, or you go sit in the forest all night, whatever, if you don't have those experiences, you're just going to always just kind of not really have you're not really going to have a dog in the hunt, as they say.
That's right. That's one of the aspects of my job I really enjoy. I was unfamiliar with the term legend tripping until a couple of years ago. Somebody kind of told me about that, but I enjoy going to places that kind of have a mysterious background to them, supposedly haunted places where people see Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I served in the military. I've kind of been all over the world. I can sleep just about anywhere. I have no qualms about going to to a really spooky place and spending the night. To me, that's kind of fun. I enjoy because I spend so much time in the office and so much time in that environment that I like going out and getting in the field and seeing with my own eyes and smelling the smells, touching the ground. I really enjoy that. It allows me to do a better story too. So.
Well, yeah, and I enjoy. I follow you on Instagram. And of course, I keep up with your articles, but I enjoy seeing. I mean, you're always like going somewhere with history. You're down a old beaten path. You're getting photos of these old churches, the old cemeteries, and you're telling little backstories behind them. And I've been enjoying watching that and following you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Again, that's something that our generation is able to do that investigators wouldn't have been able to do just really a relatively short time ago. But I don't have many hobbies. I enjoy reading, but I enjoy getting out because I love this part of the country. I've lived in Virginia. I've lived in Tuscaloosa, Montgomery. I've lived in a lot of places, but this is where I'm from. And I love Southwest Alabama. I love the people here. There's a lot of history here. There's a lot of unusual history here. And, just getting out and seeing these places and talking to the people that have lived there, their whole lives. A lot of them have really interesting stories. And I don't want us to lose those stories. I think there's a lot of value in documenting these stories and kind of preserving them for people that haven't even been born yet, that otherwise they'll never hear about, some of the things that people have to say.
Yeah. And that reminds me of, I grew up in Butler County, Georgiana. I was all around McKenzie, Greenville, and even Evergreen. And I know I grew up with my mom and my grandmother. They would love to go riding the roads, and mainly down around McKenzie and in Brook. I know you've heard about Brooks, and back in that area, back toward Evergreen, and we would go there quite often, just taking these. They would love to go see where they grew up and talk about it. And my mom would always tell me, these far out stories of ghosts and trees that had supposed buried treasure at the bottom, and you can't dig it up because the screams and the moans happen. You know, they chase people away and all this, and just good stories. But I can't. As I grew up and got older, she still told those same stories without fail, that every detail. And I loved having those accounts, but it seems like a lot of those were really steeped in some kind of truth. And I know I posted something a long time ago. I think that you may have commented on it, but she told me one encounter that happened in Brooks, which is around McKenzie, and I think it might have been just off. I think there's a Sapulga River maybe that runs through there.
Oh yeah, that's right.
She mentioned being on a buckboard wagon coming home from church. I think it was one night, and she was with I think she was with her grandparents, and they recall some headless dark figure coming out, and she was a child, but she recalled this headless dark figure coming out from behind the river, behind the bridge, up on the dirt road, grabbing the wagon and just stopping the wagon and the mule in its tracks. And she said her granddad just kept beating this mule with the whip until it started bleeding, and it just couldn't pull away from this entity or whatever it was. And you know, that story used to just kept me still, because I was pretty rambunctious. But it's like she said eventually it just let go, and they were able to get on their way. And she said, but she remembers it not having a head. And I know I told the story, but after I got to researching this whole Bigfoot thing, and it's like a lot of the accounts, they talk about this thing having broad shoulders, but it goes up to almost like a cone or a conical shape. And some of the just the shadows of it, it appeared that it didn't have a head. And you know, I got to thinking, what if this was some type of Bigfoot or cryptid, and not really a supernatural thing, but what if this was one of those that they saw, and this is the best way they could explain it? So
very possible. It's very possible, and you hit on something else too. A lot of the Bigfoot enthusiasts in this area. One of the theories is these creatures tend to stay near large bodies of water, like the Sapulga River, and like over on the Pine Orchard side of the county, you have Burnt Corn Creek and Murder Creek, and which is kind of that's kind of the name of that creek is a whole other story in itself. But these Bigfoot reports, they kind of all center around bodies of water, and the idea is that they have to have fresh water to drink and to keep cool, and also those areas attract game like the deer we talked about, being drowned earlier. So
right, and I got one more story to tell you, and I think you can corroborate this a little bit. But I've got to get back down there. But I was invited, and I'm not going to say their names, but you'll know who I'm talking about just by the area. And I'm going to have the family on soon when they have time to come on and tell me their entire story. But I went one night when I was down there visiting family. I drove on down to this area in XL, and this family invited me out there. They said, we have been hearing these whooping noises, these howls, these screams. We've heard tree knocks. We've heard mumbling, just this low vocal mumbling and stuff. And I don't know if you know who I'm talking about yet or not, but I do. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, man,
and very credible people too. I would take whatever they tell you to be the truth.
Oh, absolutely.
Good folks, good decent folks. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I got down there, and I pulled down to the pond, and which is right beside a big swamp. And I pulled up, and within 5 minutes of getting out and introducing myself and meeting everyone, we heard a tree just like snap or crash and fall over to the ground. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And she said, yep, this happens all the time. And I was like, wow. And then, now I don't know what that was, but it was a literal tree that it's not just it wasn't just a falling tree. It was almost something rushed through the branches on the way to the ground. It's just like it was almost slammed down. But we heard a crack and then a boom. And then the rest of the night, we didn't hear the hoops and hollers, but I actually heard the low mumbling. and talking off in a distance. And I said, is there anyone back there? She says, no, that place is littered with moccasins. And I pulled up on GPS map, and there were no home sites, no farms, because there was just nothing but swamp through there forever. But we could hear this low mumbling and talking, and there's a lot. I think there was a lot going on down there, and I can't wait for them to come on and tell me their story. But I had to tell you that real quick. I don't know if I ever told you that I actually came down there. So
I'm very familiar with that family, and I've that's one of that's kind of, from a newspaper standpoint, that's kind of an interesting little scenario there. That family, I contacted them over a year ago with the idea of, hey, look, I know you've had these things going on. Let's do a newspaper story on this. Well, I actually backed off. I didn't do a story on them in the paper because that there was, among people in our area that are investigating these creatures, they didn't want the site to be tainted by people that were going to kind of drive around through there and kind of maybe contaminate the area with just a lot of vehicles and stuff.
Absolutely.
So I didn't do a story on that to kind of allow the Bigfoot researchers to go in there and kind of do their own investigations without being hampered by a lot of publicity. And as far as I know, the activity still continues in that area, and it's not far from where, through the woods, it's not far from where the Ackerman brothers live. So
right.
It may be kind of all connected there.
Yeah, I think so. I want to get back down there soon, and I definitely want to spend a couple of days or a couple of nights out there in that area, but I'm going to wait till it gets a little bit cooler, because I remember the mosquitoes almost carried me off down there. And
like she was saying, the moccasins, my goodness, I walked up on one in my front yard just the other day. So they are out and about. They love this time of year. This is their time of year. So
they absolutely do.
Nothing would mess up a Bigfoot field trip, like a moccasin bite. That'd be terrible. Which I was just sitting here thinking, you talked about the snakes. All right, now here's an interesting story that I did one time about 4 years ago. These were two very credible witnesses, the type people that would not come to the newspaper with some kind of cooked up story. I had these men. They were in their 30s. They were fishing at night on the Alabama River near Claiborne, and this is not far from where the video of the Bigfoot drowning a deer was shot.
Okay.
They're fishing at night, and they're pretty close to the bank, maybe 20 or 30 yards away, and they hear an unusual noise on the bank, and they don't know. They can't see it. They don't know what it is. They don't know if it's maybe a deer or a turkey or something like that. And this is a story they tell. They get out a light that's kind of a high beam type light, and they shine it on the bank. And in their own words, they describe seeing a humongous snake, like a gigantic prehistoric length snake. Like, I forget the exact, without referring to my notes, I forget exactly how long they estimated it to be, but it was, like as long as a house, like 50 feet, 60 feet long.
Good grief.
And it scared the gentleman with the light so bad that he dropped the light, and he talked about watching the light spiral down into the water beneath the boat, and there was no discussion. They immediately cranked the boat and left the area. Well, whenever I did a story on that in the paper and started, I participate in a radio show every morning and a half for a number of years. We talked about that on the radio quite a bit. Well, people started calling it the Macaconda. That was kind of the nickname for this creature, which had apparently been seen by a number of other fishermen over the years. But that's just the anecdotal story is all we have. We don't have any tracks, so to speak, or remains or anything like that. But like you were saying earlier, sometimes there's kind of a nugget of truth to some of these tales. But who knows what they saw? Yeah,
and then since you mentioned that, I'll go out and hunt Bigfoot all day, but I will not probably come check on the Macaconda. Or whatever. I'm pretty sure I won't be down there for that one. I don't do snakes.
Yeah, that's not how my list either. But you know, if you do if you do some research on this, it's pretty interesting. There's another unusual tale from this part of the country about. Have you ever heard of Two-Toed Tom?
Oh, absolutely, I have.
That's kind of another popular. It's for listeners that aren't familiar with it. It's supposedly like a giant alligator that only has two toes because somehow he became injured. But you know, growing up, he was kind of the boogeyman at the river. You know, the Two-Toed Tom was going to get you. You know.
Yeah, I got a couple of police officers that we would just get together off duty and do a lot of this stuff. We've been in swamps all over the place, and we've kind of done it all in the Alabama. But believe it or not, we went down to the P River and stayed there 2 or 3 days on this little island where supposedly Two-Toed Tom lived. And
oh wow,
there's an old big iron trestle bridge or something that the hunters used to get over to that area. But we stayed there for 2 or 3 days and looked around, and it was pretty creepy. We didn't see her here, but it was just creepy. We heard a lot of strange noises, but I've never heard anyone else talk about Two-Toed Tom before. So
yeah, Two-Toed Tom. And you know, I write a weekly column for the newspaper in Camden, which is in Wilcox County, and it's really a sportsman's paradise. There's a lot of pristine forests up there. Well, the world record American alligator, the Stokes alligator, it was killed in Wilcox County, and I forget how big this alligator was, but listeners can kind of Google the Stokes alligator. It was a humongous prehistoric size alligator.
Really?
It was just crazy how big this thing was. Yeah, and it's unless they moved it, I think they had a taxidermist preserve this gigantic alligator, and I think it's on display at the at Millis Ferry locking dam in Wilcox County. Yeah.
Wow, and I mean that's I'm gonna have to check into that because I've heard of a few large gators like that, and I know we used to go kayak. Was it Tallapoosa coming out of?
Oh yeah.
Somewhere up there. It winds all the way back through Wetumpka and Montgomery area, and it filters back into the Alabama River. And we've been on that before, kayaking and camping along the way, just because there was some reports of like some Indian burial grounds that were haunted. So we've kind of followed those around and never heard anything. Of course, we did a lot of fishing and a lot of camping, but we had fun doing that. But no, Alabama's just full of a lot of mystery, and I don't think it gets enough attention.
Well, I think it helps, you know, if you have somebody that's looking, somebody like me, you're a journalist that's interested in these tales, somebody like you, somebody that has, that's really into looking into these things and getting the stories out there. You know, you talked about the Indian burial grounds, and then earlier you talked about the headless man that grabbed the horse on the road. That reminds me too. Connecticut County, I-65 runs through Connecticut County,
right?
And there's a portion of that highway that it's in a number of books. Like if you go, there's a book called Haunted Places by Dennis Hawk. There's actually an entry for it in that book. It talks about the haunted highway. Now, I-65, as it runs from Montgomery to Mobile, it runs through Connecticut County, and the story is that during the construction of this big highway, they cut through a number of Indian burial grounds, like these old mounds and stuff. Mm-hmm. And there's working in EMS and working in law enforcement, you kind of come to realize that there are places where like car accidents happen more frequently than others. Well, there's a stretch of this highway in Connecticut County, and again, they call it the Haunted Highway, where an unusual number of accidents occur. And people blame these accidents on things that they see in the highway. I've been told by one lady told me that her husband were coming north on the interstate, and this lady, she described her as dressed like like an Indian woman, and she was carrying a bundle, maybe like a baby, close to her chest. And the story is that she ran out in front of the car on the highway. Now the couple that saw this lady, and it's at night, it's in a remote part of the interstate. They didn't wreck or anything. They didn't hit this lady, but the husband and wife both saw the same thing. It was really odd. There was an 18-wheeler driver that hit a bridge abutment, and his story was that a horse-drawn carriage crossed the interstate in front of him. And this is in the part of the interstate where that would be impossible. You know, if you look at the terrain and the ditches and all that, I mean, that's just you couldn't even recreate it if you had a horse and carriage. You know, so again, this is the part of the world I live in.
Right, and I grew up knowing about that stretch also, and I've heard the stories. It's pretty incredible. And that reminds me, just recently, was it in that area that someone saw a possible Bigfoot, like standing beside 65?
Yes, this was from a gentleman who asked to be anonymous, but again, I know him. I don't think I would be remiss in saying that this gentleman is also a minister, kind of like Wesley Ackerman, and he didn't want his name in the paper because he didn't want people to make fun of him and kind of give him a hard time, but he wanted people to know that this thing was out there because he was afraid that it might hurt somebody. And the story is that he and his son were traveling south on I-65, and I think they were in actually the southern part of Butler County, which is north of Conecuh. And the gentleman described seeing a large, hairy creature that was the top of his head was just below a highway sign, and somebody went out there and measured the sign, and I think he told me it was the bottom of the sign was like 12 feet off the ground. So that kind of gives you an idea of how large this thing was. And he said as they drove past this thing, it was standing on the edge of the highway, kind of with his feet right on the edge of the highway, and he was looking down the whole time. But they kind of, as they're traveling down the interstate, they only see it for a brief period of time. And then since then, I've had 3 different people email me or text me about seeing kind of unusual things like that in that same part of the interstate. So,
and was that so? You said it was just below the Butler County line,
I think it was. You know where the Georgiana exit is? Was it 10? Is it the 106 exit? I think it was just south. I think it was just south of there. I'd have to look at my notes to be sure, but it was in Butler County. Yeah. Yeah,
and I have to take a political dig while I'm at it, but yeah, I know exactly where that exit is, and I was through there the other day, and on 106, and I ran that stop sign, which at the actual bridge, which is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. But I know they have a lot of beach traffic overflow, but anyway, I'm just griping a little bit. That was the dumbest place in the world to put a stop sign. I mean, nowhere in this entire country do they stop that just and have an off ramp with just. Why couldn't they put a green light there or a red light or something? But
that's a good question. I do not know.
It's even got Bigfoot upset down there. I mean, he's like he doesn't know what's going on. But
old Bigfoot, he don't know whether to stop or go.
I know it, but seriously, back to I'm not going to keep you too long, but I want to. We joked about it the other night, but I know you've heard. I've got to say this, and I don't know who's listening. I probably got 2 followers, but you still remind me of Kolchak the Night Stalker, that great, awesome late '70s or maybe mid '70s. TV show starring Davin McGavin as a newspaper reporter who just always falls into these odd reports, and you just remind me of him because you keep getting these things and coming to you, and you're just out there and researching and investigating, and it's awesome.
Well, I kind of take that as a badge of honor to be compared to Kolchak because early in my career, people would call me that. They called me Mickey Spillane and stuff like that. And being young, I didn't know really what they were talking about. And I actually watched the entire run of the Kolchak TV show, and I haven't ran into any werewolves or vampires yet, but again, I'm a big fan of the X-Files.
Oh yeah.
And being a guy, I kind of like the idea of being maybe a Fox Mulder type guy, but I think I actually have more in common with Scully. You know, she was more of a skeptic, and that kind of fits my personality a little better. But yeah, Scully, Mulder, Kolchak. Hey, you know, if I fit in that group, you know, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I've always got lumped in with Mulder as being like the all-in, you know, believe. But I'm more skeptical than, you know, people give me credit for. And I try to, when I go out and do an investigation, I try to, I look at everything that could, you know, the probable cause of it. I look at everything that could possibly happen to cause this, or what made this noise, or what did we see here? Are there reflections going on? Whatever the case. But, you know, I like to systematically do that, because if you can cancel out anything probable that you can imagine, if you're still left with questions, you may have something, you know, paranormal on your hands. And I like to just take that approach to it. I don't go in there believing, matter of fact, this is a Bigfoot, this is a UFO, this is a gray alien, this is a ghost. I don't go in there. And now I'm a skeptic. I guess I'm a skeptic that wants to believe, so that kind of drives me a little bit. But I still don't know where I stand on all of this stuff. I just like to get in the reports and go see what I can figure out.
I'm a big fan of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He wrote the old Sherlock Holmes stories. Since I was a kid, I ate that stuff up.
Oh yeah.
And you can learn a lot from those stories when it comes to how you approach problem solving and looking at things that may be hard to explain. And I think in one of the Holmes stories, he says when you eliminate if you eliminate a lot, sometimes you're left with the impossible, but that's the answer, you know.
Right. And yeah, and I know you're familiar with Occam's razor.
Right.
And to me, that I don't think that always applies. I mean, and you have some that will debate that it absolutely applies, and then you have some that's like, no, we're working outside of a little bit different realm for this to apply. And so I don't know, man. And well, I tell you what, I'm gonna give you an opportunity to. I mean, how can people get in touch with you? And I know everyone down there can get in touch with you pretty easily, but just, for whatever audience I have, how can they get in touch with you, or if they want to tell you their story?
I think the easiest way for your listeners to get in touch with me, I have a Twitter account. It's Lee Peacock 2013. If they'll just go to Twitter and send me a message, I'll be sure to get back with them.
All right, and now, are you also like a moderator or an administrator on was it Southwest Alabama Bigfoot?
Yes, that is another. That's another great way to get in touch. Southwest Alabama Bigfoot Hunters. That's kind of the catch-all group that we have for this part of the country. Kind of like the newspaper. That's kind of our online clearinghouse for local reports. I get a lot of good tips through that Facebook page. So yeah, anybody listening is welcome to go to that page. My email address is on that page. So just feel free to reach out, and I'll always respond. I may not respond immediately, but I will respond.
Yeah, I know it, and I go in there a lot, and you're very diligent about keeping the next article up, or kind of what's going on all over the country, not just in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, I try to update it every day. That doesn't always happen, but try to update it once a day. You mentioned Instagram earlier. I think that's Lee Peacock 2015, and the blog that I have is Blogspot at Lee Peacock 2010. So invite people to check that out. If you go in there, there's a little search field. You go in and type in Bigfoot. You should pull up all of our local reports. So it's that's kind of a way I can go back and it's kind of a good online source for all the stuff that's happening in our area.
Yeah, and like we were talking about earlier, the technology nowadays allows us as reporters or investigators, researchers, whatever. It just allows us to just put another piece of the puzzle together, and that's
right. That's kind of the advantage we have nowadays. And 20 years from now, who knows what additional leaps we'll make in that area.
Right. Well, man, I want to thank you so much for finally coming on. I know you and I have been trying to hook up and get together for a while, but I'm glad we were able to make it happen. And if you ever need anything, and especially down there, I know how to get there. So you just give me a shout, and I'd love to come on some of your investigations with you. And
oh yeah, that'd be a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on. This is my first podcast interview, so I feel like I feel like I've made another step down the road as far as this stuff goes. But I do appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun, and there's nothing that says maybe a little further down the road I can't come back with some fresh stories and stuff. So just kind of keep me in mind.
No, I will, man. Anytime you want to come on, I mean, we can. We didn't even really dig into what we think may be going on or what we think these things are, and I'm working with some different theories at this point about what these things are, and it's just kind of starting to blow my mind. And we'll go into that next time, but I'm definitely going to have you back, and we'll just maybe with some others. Maybe we can even talk to some people down there, Ashley McFall, or some of the others. We can have like a roundtable discussion of what we think is going on here. I would love that. And next time, if I get down there to visit, maybe we can actually do that in person. So, but
sounds good. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, man. But thanks again. And
you're welcome.
We will talk to you later. And like I said, if you have anybody down there that wants to come on my show, just send them to my new website is mysterioushuntman.com, or I have a Facebook page with the same name, or you can tell them to send me you can give them my number, but or they can send me an email, mysterioushuntman@gmail.com. But man,
all right,
thank you so much. It was an honor and pleasure to talk to you, and you call me anytime.
All right, thank you, Paul. Have a good day.
All right, you too. Have a good weekend, dude.
Bye-bye.
And that's it for another episode of Mysterious Huntsman. Thanks for listening again, guys. And remember, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can reach me at mysterioushuntman@gmail.com, or you can find me on my Facebook page at Mysterious Huntsman, or my new website, mysterioushuntman.com. Thanks. Have a great week, and we will talk to you soon.